Good evening, I'm Adrian Vale, and for the past 3 decades I've wandered through the philosophical landscapes of both East and West, searching not for answers but for better questions. Today I want to explore one of the most profound paradoxes in human ethics: forgiveness. Is it the highest virtue as Christ taught? Or is it, as Nietzsche suggested, a disguised form of weakness? A poison we call medicine? I've stood in cathedrals where forgiveness is preached as divine. I've also walked through ruins of empires that forgave nothing and forgot nothing, and I've come to believe that the question itself, is forgiveness strength or weakness, reveals something deeper about how we understand power, memory, and what it means to be human. Picture this: Jerusalem, roughly 2,000 years ago. A man is being executed, slowly, painfully, publicly. His crime: claiming to be the Son of God, threatening the religious and political order. As the nails pierce his flesh, as his lungs struggle for air, he looks down at his executioners and says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." This moment, this radical act, became the cornerstone of Christian ethics. Forgiveness elevated to the divine. Not just forgiveness of small slights, mind you, but forgiveness of the ultimate transgression, murder itself. Christianity didn't invent forgiveness, but it revolutionized it. It transformed forgiveness from a social transaction into a spiritual imperative. In the Sermon on the Mount, Christ doesn't say forgive occasionally or forgive when it's convenient. He says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. He says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is forgiveness as strength, but a peculiar kind of strength. It's not the strength of the warrior who defeats his enemy. It's the strength of the one who refuses to be defined by enmity itself. It's the strength to break the cycle of retaliation, to step outside the logic of revenge. The Christian conception rests on several assumptions. First, that humans are fundamentally flawed. We are all sinners, all capable of terrible acts. Therefore, who are we to withhold forgiveness when we ourselves require it? Second, that forgiveness liberates both the forgiver and the forgiven. It releases us from the prison of resentment, from the endless rehearsal of our wounds. And third, perhaps most importantly, that forgiveness is possible because there is a higher order, a divine justice that transcends human justice. We can afford to forgive because God will ultimately judge. We don't have to carry that burden ourselves. For centuries, this vision shaped Western civilization. Forgiveness became synonymous with moral superiority, with spiritual advancement. To forgive was to be Christ-like. To refuse forgiveness was to be petty, vengeful, trapped in the lower realms of human nature. But then came a philosopher with a hammer. Friedrich Nietzsche looked at Christian forgiveness and saw something entirely different. He saw what he called ressentiment, a French word he preferred because it captured something the German Groll, or English resentment, couldn't quite express. It's resentment that has fermented, that has become creative, that has built an entire moral system. In On the Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche presents a radical reinterpretation. He argues that Christian morality, including its emphasis on forgiveness, didn't emerge from strength but from weakness. It was, he claimed, a slave morality created by those who lacked the power to take revenge. who lacked the strength to assert themselves in the world. Unable to defeat their oppressors physically, they defeated them morally. They declared that the qualities of the powerful, strength, pride, self-assertion, were evil, and they declared that the qualities of the powerless, meekness, humility, forgiveness, were good. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Nietzsche would hear in this not divine compassion, but impotent rage disguised as virtue. The forgiveness of the weak, he might say, is simply revenge deferred, revenge transformed into a moral weapon. I forgive you becomes a way of saying, I am better than you. But Nietzsche offers something else, something more interesting than mere critique. He speaks of a different kind of strength, the strength to forget. In the second essay of the genealogy, Nietzsche writes about what he calls active forgetfulness. This isn't the passive forgetting of dementia or distraction. It's an active capacity, a strength. It's the ability of the healthy animal and the healthy human to digest experience, to metabolize even painful experiences, and then to move on. The strong person, in Nietzsche's vision, doesn't need to forgive because they don't hold on to injuries in the first place. They're not consumed by what was done to them. They have what Nietzsche calls plastic power, the ability to heal, to close wounds, to incorporate even damage into new forms of health. Contrast this with ressentiment, which is precisely the inability to forget, the inability to digest. The person trapped in ressentiment endlessly rehearses their injuries. They build their identity around their wounds. They cannot move forward because they're constantly looking backward, constantly reopening what should have healed. And here's Nietzsche's devastating insight. Christian forgiveness, for all its talk of liberation, actually keeps us chained to our injuries. It requires us to constantly remember what we're forgiving. It makes our wounds central to our identity. The forgiver must always remember they were wronged. Otherwise, what is there to forgive? The strong person, by contrast, simply forgets. They move on. They create new values, new projects, new joys. They don't need the elaborate machinery of forgiveness because they're not trapped in the past. So where does this leave us? With two radically different visions of human excellence. On one hand, Christ's forgiveness, a conscious, deliberate act of grace, a choice to release resentment, to wish well even to those who have harmed us, a recognition of shared humanity, shared fallibility, a spiritual discipline that transforms suffering into compassion. On the other hand, Nietzsche's forgetfulness, an organic, vital capacity, not a moral achievement, but a sign of health, not a struggle against resentment, but a freedom from it, not transformation of suffering, but transcendence of it. But I wonder, and I've wondered about this in monasteries and in markets, in libraries and in ruins, whether this opposition is as absolute as it seems. Consider, is Christian forgiveness always weak? I've met people who have forgiven the unforgivable, parents who have forgiven their children's murderers, survivors who have forgiven their torturers. And I've seen in them not weakness, but a kind of terrible strength. The strength to face the full horror of what was done and still choose not to be consumed by hatred. That's not the strength of the warrior, perhaps, but its strength nonetheless. And is Nietzschean forgetfulness always strong? I've also met people who pride themselves on not dwelling on the past, on moving on. But sometimes this moving on is just avoidance. Sometimes this forgetfulness is just repression. The wound doesn't heal, it just goes underground, where it festers differently. Perhaps the real question isn't which is stronger, but what kind of strength are we talking about? Nietzsche was right that there's something suspicious about a forgiveness that constantly rehearses injuries, that builds identity around victimhood, that uses moral superiority as a weapon. That's not liberation. That's just resentment in a different costume. But Christ, or the vision attributed to him, points to something else. The possibility that we can remember without being enslaved by memory. That we can acknowledge harm without being defined by it. That we can choose how our past relates to our present. There's a line from the Christian mystic Meister Eckhart that has stayed with me. To be full of things is to be empty of God. To be empty of things is to be full of God. Perhaps we could translate this. To be full of resentment is to be empty of life. To be empty of resentment is to be full of possibility. But how do we empty ourselves? Is it through the conscious work of forgiveness? Or through the organic health of forgetfulness? Or through some third way we haven't yet named? I'll tell you something from my own life. 20 years ago, someone I trusted deeply betrayed that trust in a way that nearly destroyed me. For years, I carried that betrayal like a stone in my chest. I tried to forgive. I really did. I went through all the Christian motions. I prayed for this person. I wished them well. I told myself I had forgiven. But I hadn't. Not really, because every time I said I forgive you in my mind, I was really saying, look how magnanimous I am. Look how you wronged me, and yet I forgive. The forgiveness itself was a form of resentment. Then, years later, something shifted. I can't even tell you exactly when or how, but one day I realized I simply didn't think about it anymore. The betrayal had become like a scar, visible if you looked for it, but no longer painful. I hadn't forgiven in the Christian sense. I had forgotten in the Nietzschean sense. Or rather, I had digested the experience. It had become part of my past without dominating my present. But here's what troubles me about claiming this as a Nietzschean victory. I don't think I could have reached that forgetfulness without first attempting forgiveness. The conscious work of trying to release resentment, even when it was imperfect, even when it was mixed with pride, that work created the conditions for genuine letting go. Maybe forgiveness is like a cast on a broken bone. You need it for a while, but if you never take it off, the muscles atrophy. The goal isn't to forgive forever. It's to heal to the point where forgiveness is no longer necessary, because the injury is no longer alive. Or consider this. Perhaps what Nietzsche called the strength to forget is actually the fruit of successful forgiveness. Perhaps Christian forgiveness, at its best, aims at precisely what Nietzsche describes. A state where we're no longer bound by our injuries, where we have the vital health to move forward. The difference might be this. Christianity sees forgiveness as a perpetual practice, a discipline we must maintain. Nietzsche sees forgetfulness as a natural state we return to when we're healthy. But what if forgiveness is the medicine that restores us to health, and forgetfulness is what health looks like? So is forgiveness strength or weakness? I think the answer is, it depends entirely on what we mean by forgiveness and what we mean by strength. If forgiveness means endlessly rehearsing our wounds while claiming moral superiority, then yes, it's weakness disguised as virtue. It's ressentiment in a Sunday dress. If forgiveness means denying harm, pretending injury didn't occur, rushing to move on without actually processing pain, then it's not strength either. It's just avoidance. But if forgiveness means the conscious work of releasing resentment, of refusing to let injury define us, of creating space for new possibilities, then it is a kind of strength. Not the only kind, perhaps not even the highest kind, but strength nonetheless. And if forgetfulness means the organic health that comes from having truly digested experience, from having metabolized even pain into new life, then it too is strength, perhaps the highest kind. Maybe the deepest wisdom is this: we need both. We need the conscious work of forgiveness to begin the healing, and we need the organic capacity for forgetfulness to complete it. We need to remember long enough to learn, and then we need to forget thoroughly enough to live. The person of true strength, if such a person exists, is neither the one who forgives everything nor the one who forgets everything. It's the one who knows when to remember and when to forget, when to work at release and when to simply let go, when to engage with injury and when to turn attention elsewhere. Christ and Nietzsche, for all their apparent opposition, might be pointing to the same destination from different directions. Christ says, "Forgive, and you will be free." Nietzsche says, "Be free, and you will forget." Perhaps they're both right. Perhaps freedom is both the means and the end. I'm 58 years old now. I've spent more than half my life thinking about these questions. And the older I get, the less certain I am of grand answers. But I'm more certain of this: the question of forgiveness is not really about other people. It's about us. It's about what kind of person we want to be, what kind of life we want to live. Do we want to be defined by our wounds? Or do we want to be defined by our capacity to heal? Do we want to carry the past like a burden? Or do we want to carry it like wisdom, lightly when needed and set down when not? These are questions each of us must answer for ourselves, and perhaps the answer changes day by day, wound by wound, year by year. Thank you for thinking with me today. Until next time, I'm Adrian Vale.